Hey everybody, just so you know, I have a Rumble channel as well as a YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked out the Rumble channel, the link is in the description of this video. Make sure you go there and subscribe just in case some glitchy stuff happens on YouTube. Who knows, right? Mountain.
Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Galant Bodybuilding. Monkey. I feel pretty pumped up today. I've been eating a lot of potatoes, like boiled potatoes and ground beef. So yeah, it's been pumping me up. So there's definitely something to eating enough carbs in your diet. That's all I can say. Like, I know that everybody's trying to get all leaned up all the time and whatever, but if you eat the carbs and the protein together, it definitely helps with building muscle because, like I said, if you're low on carbs, then the body starts to eat the muscle tissue. So you want to make sure you find that right happy medium there. And it's difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to find that right happy medium. But I'm more on the path of trying to maintain as much muscle as possible, not necessarily try to get down to shredded body fat levels. I'd like to be shredded or lean, but the leanness has to come not at the expense of muscle. That's my point. So being lean is great, but I don't want to lose muscle in order to get lean, and that's really the point I'm at in my life. I'm not going to go do a bodybuilding show right now, but I do want to maintain as much muscle and feel strong and pumpy and lumpy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I want a Sasquatch to be intimidated if they see me, not just from my bad looks, but because of my muscle mass and my smell too. Like not because of my smell either, just my muscle mass. Okay. So anyway, somebody made a comment yesterday and they talked about, and speaking of comments actually, I have to say this, speaking of comments, lately YouTube has been shutting off the comment section and sometimes I have to go back in and manually turn it on. And it's kind of like the light switch game you used to play with your siblings, when you were a kid. You turn the light off, they turn it on, or back and forth, and you guys go back and forth, or like radio stations, you change it to one station, they change it to another. Well, YouTube has been doing the same thing with the comment section for some reason. I'll go turn on the comment section, then YouTube will turn it off again, and then I'll go turn it on. And anyway, this goes on a little bit. So hopefully that gets fixed in the next little while. So sorry about that if you guys are noticing that. But there was one comment that got through, and this guy says, how do you explain yourself to people when it comes down to not touching your chest with the bench? Because I've done months and months and months on end where I've done barbell bench and every single rep I touch my chest with the bar. But I have spoken at length about this, that I find that it irritates one of my rotator cuff injuries from back in the hockey days, right? And at the same time, I don't get any extra stretch in the chest. What I find is I get a stretch to a certain point, and then when I go down a little bit lower, it's just more delt. I just get front delt. And most importantly, because I just get extra front delt and it irritates my front delt, my body's telling me not to do that. So that's why I don't do it. It's not because I'm trying to cheat the exercises up or anything like that. But this person said, how do you explain yourself to people who say, oh, you're putting yourself in incredible danger because that one time that you actually touch your chest with the bar, you're going to tear something? Well, that concern is bullshit, just so you know. It's absolute bullshit because it has been proven that when you do partials, that you actually get stronger in a much greater range of motion than the range of motion that you used in order to gain said strength. So if I'm only going to here with the bar, I'm actually getting stronger even a little bit lower, right? Even in the range of motion in a little bit more extended position, I'm still getting stronger in that range of motion and functional. And to top it off, I also talk about this at length, which is when you're doing your lighter sets or you're doing your super light days, right? You can go to a fuller range of motion if you're not feeling an irritation in the joints, right? Just go through a fuller range of motion and get that stretch, right? So you use those lighter weights as rehabilitation and also to recruit muscles and stretch muscles in certain areas just in case, right? You want to make sure that you're being honest with yourself. And then when you go to heavier weights, you may use a different form or a bit more conservative to protect yourself from grinding the joints to dust or creating injuries, right? So that type of strategy has worked really well for me over the years. And you know, there's always going to be people that they just want to disagree with everything. It doesn't matter whether you get results or not. They don't care about that. They just want you to agree with them. That's it. But I don't worry about those people because they're a waste of time anyway. And usually they end up not achieving anything. They just criticize everything. But instead of actually spending more time with themselves, being intimate with their experience and learning from that, they're too busy looking at everybody else's experience, right? Not realizing it's a grand distraction from them gaining wisdom. Because by looking deep within and doing your exercises and finding out what's working or not, that's going to serve you far better than just finding out what worked for Bob down the street, you know? So that's what I got to say about that. Let's do a warm-up set here. I already did a warm-up set before I turned the camera on, right? And then I'm going to do another warm-up set here. You know, the funny thing is a lot of people get fixated on, you know, perfect form. And again, it's like a broken record, but what I'm going to say is that there are lots of different ways to exhaust a muscle. And as a bodybuilder, you're honestly trying to explore which ways are producing the most results for you. And you may find some surprising things are going on in the body when you do certain movements. And I get this all the time where people in the comments are like saying, I tried this one exercise, like say leg presses, right? And they use strategic range of motion on leg presses just to get that really wicked pump in the quads. And then their quads blew up, got really huge, right? And before that, they might have been extending down too low, you know, overstretching the ass, maybe even bringing the bum off the seat, which is a no-no with leg presses. You never want to bring the ass off the seat. And by experimenting with different ranges of motion and different form, they discovered what is really concentrating all of that tension and that exhaustion on the quadriceps. Now, the funny thing is that a lot of people will say, Jason, you know, the leg press, great movement, right? You see people do leg presses, you know, whether they're a fan of leg presses or not, they won't make fun of the fact that the person is bent over a lot when they're doing the leg press, right? Because you know you're bent over like this, and then your quads, your knees coming like this towards the chest, right? So you're basically, your hip is bent over at a certain angle, which is really, if you look at my squat, kind of the way I squat, because the way I'm built, it just is natural to squat that way. But at the same time, it helps me keep tension on the hamstrings, which helps protect the knees. And so if you look at my squat, it's almost like a hybrid leg press in a certain way. It feels more right for me to squat that way as opposed to doing the knees over toes type of thing with more of a vertical sort of stance. Even though I have the ankle mobility to do so, like I can bring my knees far forward over my toes and keep my heel flat on the floor. I have the ankle mobility to do it, but it just puts all the pressure on the knee tendons and very little on the quadricep, funny enough. So you have to work with this geometry, this sacred muscular geometry, or physics, or whatever you want to call it, within. And as you do so, you're going to find out what works. All right, let's see what we got here. You know, sometimes people ask me what supplements I'm using or what supplements I've tried and so forth. And, you know, I've talked about BCAAs, like branched chain amino acids here and there. And I noticed that they do give me some pretty good energy for my workouts. And there's this one that I've been using which has glutamine and taurine in it, which is great, you know. But I just got these essential amino acids that I have to say I noticed the pump significantly in comparison to BCAAs. So some people talk about what's better, essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids. And again, I'm always about whatever is your weak link is probably what's going to give you the biggest benefit. But I'm definitely noticing these essential amino acids definitely are giving me a better pump and a better well-being in the musculature. And I talked about this, that when you get a certain type of awareness of your body, you start to feel a certain pumpy and lumpy feeling or well-being that precedes muscular growth. So I noticed that these amino acids, along with me eating, more protein and carbs and all that, it definitely seemed to be more of a, let's just say, have a dramatic effect, more dramatic effect than just the branched chain amino acids that I've been drinking. So, but it's always good to drink some protein during your workout. Sometimes I'll drink bone broth as well. I mean, I know it's more of a glycine type of protein. It's not a total complete protein, but sometimes I'll do that too. And it gives you kind of this low sustaining type of energy throughout your workout. There's something about it that's actually positive. I don't necessarily get a pumpy and lumpy feeling from bone broth, but from an overall health point of view, it's a great idea as well. And there is some protein in there, right? So, if you can't afford BCAAs or essential amino acids or whatever, get some bone broth, and bone broth's pretty cheap. You can get some organic bone broth, chicken or beef or whatever, or make it yourself. If you want to stew bones outside like in a cauldron, like a warlock for 2 or 3 days, you can do that too, and then freeze them and then heat them up, I guess, when you want to eat them or drink them. But yeah, that's kind of what I found. So back in the day, I'd use creatine and glutamine, HMB. That HMB, which is a metabolite of leucine, in milk products and stuff. I never really found much from HMB, as much as some people really notice that they get a great kick from it. But the standard stuff like glutamine, creatine, and amino acids, I find that's really the best bang for your buck. And then for overall health, things like ashwagandha, they're pretty good, right? And I also talk about herbal infusions a lot too, like drinking stinging nettle infusion. I just drank a mullein infusion yesterday. Mullein's great if you have a lung or flu, or honestly, it helps with inflammation and stuff too. And it helps with probably a million other things. You can look it up. It's called mullein infusion, right? So it's like a plant. You can get it in tinctures and all this stuff too. But a mullein infusion is actually a standard remedy for flus and colds and things too. So yeah, it's something to think about. So anyway, that's really what I'm, what I experiment with is mostly amino acids. I find I get a pretty good kick from. Now, a couple days ago, I actually did bench presses with 275 and I got 12 reps. And today I got 10 reps on the first and 9 reps on the second. And yes, the same type of reps I usually do, right? One could argue, oh, if you're not locking out, it's not a full rep. Like, I understand all that crap. But what I'm saying is I do the reps a certain way for a reason, because that's where I'm keeping the tension on purpose. I notice that I feel the best on the chest doing that. Best on the chest. Basically, what happened is that I feel like, hey, I'm a little bit fatigued still from a couple days ago. But the mistake a lot of people will make is that they're like, if they can't hit a PR, then that means that they didn't recover enough, or they should only come back to the gym once they're fully recovered. And I've noticed the opposite with myself. Once in a while, yes, I'll take an extra couple days off or take some rest and so forth and come back for a fresh workout. But I find that if I train and I'm still recovering a little bit, I find I get the most benefit. Now, that might not be the case with you. I'm not saying it is, but that's the case with me. And I've found that it's not quite so important for me to hit a PR every single time I touch a weight, It's more important for me to exhaust the muscle and to make sure that I exhaust it, and safely, of course. Like, I'm not on the edge of getting an injury because I'm so under recovered. But at the same time, just a slight bit of tightness or a slight fatigue is actually positive. I find I get overall better results from that. But that's just me. But you know what? It never hurts to once in a while take a week off training or take a few days off. I mean, that's always a good thing to do, just to make sure that you're not overtraining. Because sometimes, you know, and somebody brought this up in the comments, it's a very relevant topic. They say that sometimes, you know, you might be overtraining and not even know it. You know, you might be getting subtle aches and pains in the body, and that's all a reflection of just training too much. That is always possible, right? But in the end, you never really know until you push too hard where the edge is, you know? Like a lot of times you won't know where the edge is of what you can recover from or what's best unless you push a bit. And that's kind of the thing that we're doing. We're just basically saying, hey, let's do an experiment and make sure that we're aware through the whole experiment to find out what's going on. And I've been doing this dog and pony show for so long that I get a pretty good understanding of what I feel like and when I need to back off and so forth, right? Good enough. Now, sometimes, you know, and this is just something to think about, right? Sometimes I think you're better off not assuming that an exercise works a certain body part. And what I mean by this is that, say you're doing tricep press downs for triceps, and you're assuming, hey, I worked my triceps, right? My triceps are done because I did 3 or 4 sets or whatever it was and hit exhaustion, and I've done my triceps. But maybe your triceps are developing a certain way, and you're noticing, oh, wait a second, you know, my triceps not developing quite right. Well, maybe you're working part of the tricep, but maybe there's another head or some other aspect of the tricep that just is not getting stimulated from that certain exercise. Although your buddy might be getting, you know, more than enough stimulation from it, you might not be. So that's when you start to attack from a different angle. You start to attack the muscle from a different angle. So I notice with tricep kickbacks, even if I'm doing lightweight, it just feels 100% different than when I'm doing anything else. It's like I'm activating a certain head of the tricep, mostly the exterior head, you know, which is what I need really. If you're going to say like, you know, where am I weak? I probably would need more of that. And I'm not saying I have to do it super heavy. I do it moderately light because that's the only way to activate the muscle properly. If I go too heavy, then I start bringing in the rear delt too much, and then just the stabilizing of the elbow or just keeping the elbow up becomes more of the weak link in the exercise than actually the tricep. But anyway, I mean, it's worth experimenting with heavy and lightweight no matter what you decide to do. But my point is that if you make any false leaps of logic in your training, you will, let's just say, make the mistake of not looking under a rock where you should be looking, you know? So say you train legs, you're like, hey, I already did squats, I trained legs. Yeah, but maybe you train part of the leg, maybe the squat is hitting a majority of the leg, but maybe there's a lot of parts of the leg that aren't getting hit from the squat. And only through trying different exercises will you discover where that truth lies, right? So in bodybuilding, you're really looking at your physique and saying, how is it developing? And when you're honest with yourself, you're saying, okay, well, maybe there's something that I'm missing here. There's some exercise or some angle, some way of attacking the body in some way, in a way to stimulate these areas that don't seem to be getting stimulated. So that's the beautiful thing about it. It's not only that, it's the funny thing about it is that your body's always changing too. So sometimes, like I said, things that worked before don't work anymore. But sometimes you might be blessed with certain things that happen to me, like say the dislocating shoulder and then the rotator cuff tear, you know, and all of a sudden your body moves in weird dysfunctional ways, and you have to find ways around that in order to hit muscles that used to get hit very easily just from standard exercises, right? So that's kind of the challenge, right? You have to reinvent yourself so many times during any sort of athletic career. And then the neat part about bodybuilding is that you can do so. I mean, I'm not saying you can be the, you know, as good as you were or whatever, but you know what, you can improve in other ways and become better in other ways. So yeah, that's what I have to say is, like, I'm gonna do some close grip bench for a few sets, and then maybe some tricep kickbacks. And then maybe I'll go do some inclines, which is totally not the order you would normally do it in, but just for fun, just to play around, you know? So like I said, I change things up sometimes. That's, I don't know, it's a way of keeping it fresh. I don't know. Easy. Whew. Hey, yeah. Now somebody asked me why I don't lock out on tricep presses, right? So close grip bench. The reason why is because if you look at this elbow, right, I can hyperextend it quite easily, right? That's just the way I'm built. But also I notice once I get to a certain point of the lift, by locking, I basically just rest on the joints. I'm not actually getting any extra squeeze in the muscle, you know? And if I am squeezing the muscle, what I'm doing is hyperextending the elbow, which is actually a danger to the elbow. So watch my video called Should You Lock Out When You Lift? Because there's certain times where locking out is advantageous and certain times that it can cause a problem. So that's why in pressing movements, you never see me lock. Like, there's just no point, right? See here? But if I do this, I don't really get anything extra. It's like, it just feels like a waste of energy, but I'm not putting the energy is on the tricep enough to get any benefit. I guess it boils down to also, that whole basis of when the muscle is in some sort of tension and stretch, and there's constant tension on that, that's where you get the majority of the results instead of the squeezing. But like I said, if you're going to squeeze, in this case, that's not really the right time to do it. Oh yeah, watch the girl do leg presses where she hyperextends her legs because she locks out on the leg press, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, based on what I just talked about, you might do some stretching type movements and some squeezing type movements, and notice that certain rules apply to certain movements, and then those same rules don't apply to other movements, right? So you're trying to feel yourself through this process. But in the end, variety really helps. Just adding different movements into your routine and just see which ones hit the mark. And you're gonna always land on some favorites, right? Some that seem to produce the biggest bang for the buck. Like I did a playlist on here on those movements. I did like my favorite movements or my top 5 movements for back or top 5 movements for legs for me, right? So you're gonna, you know, wade through all these different exercises, and you're gonna find some that might look pretty are actually the least effective, or some that look really complicated, you know, like balancing on a ball with eggs on your head, you know, that kind of thing. And it might look fancy for an Instagram post, but it might be horrible for stimulating muscle growth, right? So you see a lot of guys that got their muscle mass and are lean and in good shape, and then they start to market these super creative exercises, but you know full well that those exercises weren't the ones responsible for them getting the muscle mass. They're just basically using it just to create a brand for themselves, or they're doing the exercise just as a glorified ballet / posing routine, right? But it's not necessarily how they gained any muscle, right? So you're going to be able to wade through a lot of the BS just through experimentation and you know, playing around. But you know, when you start, just start with the foundational truths, right? Start with simplicity, and then start to experiment from there with certain foundational exercises. And then you may notice that certain ones start to stimulate muscle mass more than others, or stimulate the muscle or make you sore and tight and pumped. And then from there, you start to experiment with that type of range of motion. You become a specialist in certain movements, right? But yeah, that's what I have to say. So it's never about either or. It's always about just finding out, which ones seem to stimulate the most. And you're also going to notice that some muscle groups respond better to the stretch technique, and then some muscle groups respond better to the squeeze technique, right? It's crazy, right? And some muscle groups seem to respond best to heavyweight, and then some muscle groups seem to respond best to lightweight. So it's again, this constant building of your own awareness and wisdom. And yeah, that's why I'm making these videos. It's just I'm like a midwife to this process for you guys. I'm not really telling you what to think. I'm just trying to help you find out what it is that is, what your body's telling you, right? Yeah. I'm like the wizard of bodybuilding, right? Mountain. So I'm just going to do a couple sets of light inclines, just 70-pound dumbbells. So I know for some of you that's heavy, some of you it might be extremely light, but yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stretch it out, nice little stretchy, make it stretchy. But one thing I'm going to talk about is a comment that's made quite a bit is, what do I think about bulking, right? So there's this thing where people bulk in the off season. It's always been a thing, like I talked about before talked about it on a podcast where Lee Priest back in the day used to get so big and fat in the off season, you didn't even know he trained. It was just, he looked like the Michelin man, like just hilarious, right? But the guy would show up in unbelievable shape for contests. So obviously it worked for him. But as a natural bodybuilder like myself, I wouldn't recommend bulking like that, getting exorbitantly fat and then trying to cut down. It's just so difficult to shred that body fat off and keep the muscle mass at the same time if you're planning on competing. Now, for overall health and well-being reasons, I do believe that somewhere in the middle is the best option, where you're not constantly cutting, but you're not bulking either. And what I mean by this is that you're trying to refine the type of food that you're taking in, so that way you're not putting on excessive amounts of body fat, but at the same time, you're able to have a bit of a reserve so that you're putting on, some muscle. So you're not calorie counting all the time and so forth. So that's the type of bulk that I did. When I was in the off season, I wouldn't monitor my food. I would eat as much as I wanted, but I would try to cut the fat down a bit or not do super high fat, but I do carbs and protein every meal and make sure that I got my protein in, right? So I was still counting my protein for sure, but a lot of times what people will do is that they say, I'm bulking. So then they'll eat a bunch of shit food, like so much shitty food, like too much fat, like exorbitant amounts, so that their body's putting on so much excessive body fat. One could argue that they're not necessarily really helping themselves put on more muscle. They're just creating more work for themselves when it comes down to getting ready for competition, right? But sometimes you got to live your life too. I'm not saying not to scarf down a pizza or have some ice cream and stuff. Like I do that too. But you don't want to have that as a daily routine, just trying to throw in as much of food, junk food as possible. So yeah, my type of bulk wasn't really a bulk as much as some guys. Like I knew some guys, they put on 50 pounds in the off season, and it was like mostly 30 or 40 pounds of body fat. It was not, it was not even, it seemed like a stupid strategy, right? Because then they were in a mad rush to cut down for a competition. They'd have to diet for 5 months. At least, and then of course they'd end up shredding off a lot of the muscle in the process because they had to get so aggressive with their diet just to get that body fat off, right? So I do believe natural bodybuilders should find the happy medium. Nourish the body, but try to nourish as much of what the muscles need, not the fat stores. And that's going to take a little bit of, let's just say, experimentation with what types of foods you should eat. I recommend protein and carbs, protein and starch. I know some guys, they like talk, you know, there's the crazy ones now, right? We don't only have the vegetarians, but now we have the carnivores that are just as crazy, where they're like, everything's an oxalate problem, you shouldn't eat carbs. And the truth is that carbs do help with muscle mass. It's just a matter of what type of carbs agree with you and not doing it excessively. And of course, I always recommend going with as organic sources of any type of food that you eat as possible. But yeah, that's what I think about bulking is find what nourishes you, but not necessarily what's going to make you super fat. But at the same time, don't worry so much about being cut all the time and counting calories in that. If you're always counting calories and trying to basically reduce this and reduce that, make sure you're always in shape, I would say that you're probably undernourishing yourself in some way, you know? So yeah, putting on muscle is tough, you know? And if you're limiting your options in that, you could argue that you're not going to necessarily put on muscle. So like I said, you got to find the sweet spot between bulking and nourishing and find where that spot is. And if you start putting on too much body fat, well then refine what types of foods you're eating rather than reducing the food, you know, and see if that works. That's what I'd recommend. All right, well, I'm going to finish the rest of my workout, but thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. I hope this helps out in your training. And if you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalglandbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters. And on Patreon, I'm doing a podcast every single week. The link is in the description, so make sure you check that out, and take care for now.